I've long thought it's quite an underrepresented part of gaming history. I've worked in the games media, in PR and marketing for over a decade, and it just feels like there hasn't really been the respect that this kind of part of gaming has been due.
Electronic tabletop gaming is a fascinating part of video game history. Before you could fit the power of an entire arcade's worth of machines in a thumbnail-sized chip, we lusted after the next best thing. As close an approximation to an arcade experience as we could get, and within our budget. Author Mike Diver visited the Retro Collective last week and gave a talk right here in the cave, which complements our display here beautifully. Some of these are ours, many of them belong to a volunteer called Rid from his private collection, and he generously loans them to the cave for people to enjoy. Because what use are they in people's attics? It's great for people to be able to come and try them out. And try them out you can if you come and visit. And Rid also brought many more along on the day because we haven't got room for his collection, it's so big, and you'll see footage of that today. So let's enjoy Mike's talk. We will dip in and out of the talk because I had some follow-up questions for him, and also I'll try and get you some footage of the various games as he talks about them so we can really get into what he's talking about. Enjoy the talk. This is Mike Diver from coin-ups to tabletops.
Right, so I suppose to start with, when you go back to when I was first playing games in the middle 80s, you'd hear like what was and what wasn't arcade perfect bandied around a lot, right? And of course, in that kind of mid 80s period, early 80s, mid 80s, probably through to the middle 90s really, the only way to get the arcade perfect experience was to go to the arcade, right? Because anything you played at home was distinctly limited. Like, I'm sure all of you have seen PacMan on the 2600. You know, compromises had to be made, okay? Hardware had limitations, you had to change the control schemes, and that kind of arcade perfect experience, you couldn't get it at home, right? So just for fun, this is why I was hoping that people can see the screen all right. Can you name these Atari 2600 ports before we go any further? Starting with this one. Anyone? Top left? Yeah, this room's going to get this. This is great. This one here, top right. Track and field. Interesting, cool. Any advance on track and field? Bottom left. And then bottom right. Let's go through them, starting with what I think was the easiest. Yep. Defender, absolutely. Donkey Kong Jr. Whoever shouted that, great work. Who said track and field? That's Double Dragon. But you know what I mean, right? It nails the point of what I'm talking about. And then, of course, Zaxxon, very, very different from the Atari 2600. And I feel mean picking on the Atari 2600, but when these electronic games are coming through, that's the kind of number one console in the world, right? That's the big seller. That's the kind of, not necessarily the best, but it's the biggest selling. It's kind of the benchmark for what home conversions look like. So when it comes to these games and kind of why focus on them, why do a book about them, I've always really liked how they kind of are their own things, they innovate within their own space, they work to their constraints, they understand what the limitations are, and they kind of maximize that to an extent. You know, they're not necessarily there to replicate the arcade, they are a different version of what you might have played in the arcade, or in some respects, you know, they're originals, sometimes they're like clones, if you will. Some have very, very arcade style cabs, some not. A lot of them have like really cool decals. You know, you'll look at stuff like Scramble with its kind of like screen effects. Obviously Zaxxon is a brilliant one. Even Astro Wars, you know, the design around a kind of old school game like Astro Wars is brilliant.
Hello Mike, you talked about arcade perfect in the talk. These old games were never going to be able to exactly replicate the arcades. But which came closest for you?
Probably unsurprisingly, and admittedly they're not exact arcade ports, but the Nintendo ones, I think that kind of first party quality shines through into their Game & Watch tabletops. You know, they're not quite the same game, but they can still give you a really enjoyable arcade akin experience. I've always got a soft spot for Gakken's Frogger as well, which came to the UK under the CGL name, so obviously the Konami license. But I mean, things like Frogger, it's kind of like a hard one to get wrong in a way, I suppose, but it's just a really good version of it. and even like Puck Monster, the PacMan game that was sort of semi-licensed in Japan, but not obviously in the UK, with its kind of moving maze layout, which isn't always the case with those games. That does a pretty good job of putting Pac-Man on your bedroom floor or tabletop, wherever you're playing it.
Before the talk continues, I must say a big thank you to our sponsors, PCBWay.com. Their PCB manufacturing, design and supporting services such as CNC milling and 3D printing fit perfectly with what we do here at The Cave. And the retro section of their shared projects at PCBWay.com is filled with everything from Commodore 64 to Amiga and Atari ST gadgets that you can order with just one click. Check out PCBWay.com and we thank them for their support. Display technology, of course, was a limiting factor with these games. How do you recreate the excitement of an arcade game with such limited displays? Well, some games didn't even try. They had no displays whatsoever, such as Pocket Simon here, and there were electromechanical examples, as Mike goes on to tell us.
But before we look at screens, the earliest games in the book are from 1978. So Simon, Demon Driver, which is called Digital Derby, and Black Racer in other territories. These were games that didn't need screen. I'm sure most people in this room have played or at least seen Simon in their life. One of several games co-designed in this case by Ralph Baer, who obviously came up with the brown box, which led to the Magnavox Odyssey, the kind of father, if you will, of home gaming. But it's worth considering, as is the case with a lot of games we're going to see today, that neither came out without precedent, right? So Demon Driver was preceded by Auto Race. Has anyone heard of Auto Race from Mattel, 1976? Didn't even use cars, just little LEDs on the 3 lanes of its track there. But played a lot like Demon Driver in terms of the basic premise. And Simon, this is fun. Ralph Baer was very, very angry that Atari ripped off Pong, right, from the Magnavox's version of tennis. But Ralph Baer ripped off Simon from an Atari game called Touch Me in the arcades, which later came out as a handheld, which you can see there. And Simon's success didn't just lead to Touch Me coming out. There were some other games here. I can see Maniac back there, another Ralph Baer game actually, but also Copycat came out from Tiger. A lot of you will know Tiger from its LCD games, but Copycat was one of its earlier products. I think they started with record players. I don't know if anyone knows that for sure. I'm pretty sure they did. They made like a Spider-Man record player for kids as one of Tiger's first products. And of course, Simon itself led to further versions of Simon. You can still buy Simon everywhere, right? You had Pocket Simon, you had Super Simon. Super Simon's in the book, and variations thereof.
Simon is obviously still around in its various forms. You can get it basically on a key ring nowadays, tiny little versions of Simon or Simon clones. But I kind of think back to games that my kids have had in recent years that they've seen advertised on YouTube or Kids TV, and there's things like Bop It, of course, which viewers might be familiar with, the kind of touch this bit, yank this bit, and all the rest of it. It's the same sort of process. It's a memory game. And my youngest, one Christmas, I think it was Christmas, he got a game called Silly Sausage, which is basically the same sort of thing. It's literally like a big Frankfurter you hold, and it's like push its belly button, pull it apart, or like I don't know, whatever the different things you do. So that kind of memory-based follow along with different modes, different challenges, and different setups, so you can pass it between players. Those are the games my head goes to. But Simon is kind of a bit like Tetris, I suppose, in so much as it kind of nailed what it needed to do at the first time of asking, and anything that's come afterwards is just a variation thereon, rather than being something that's better than the original.
The games that did have displays had to walk a fine line between the technology that they used, the technology that was available at the time, and power consumption, because we did expect these things to run off of batteries. So if we look at Grandstand's Firefox F7, for example, that can run off of 4 C-cell batteries. Pretty standard. Most of these run off of 2 or 4 C-cell batteries. And it does also have a power jack on the side, just here, if I can get the battery compartment back on, because it would eat through batteries pretty quickly. But come on, Firefox. If you wanted to be the popular kid at school, and take this in with you, then you'd expect it to run off of batteries. At least I always wanted to take these things in with me. Or if I didn't have them, I would befriend the kid who did on the last day of school and get as much Firefox or Frogger gaming in as I could. But the screen technology that was used on these things was far from cutting edge, as Mike went on to tell us.
So in terms of the displays shown in the book, most of them are vacuum fluorescent displays. A lot of people in the room will be familiar with these, lovely bright colours. Reds, yellows, greens, dates back to 59, which I did actually see up there as well, is mentioned. It's a Philips innovation, so well done them. Now used in all kinds of things, microwaves, alarm clocks. Some manufacturers seem very proud of their fluorescent displays. Bandai in particular would put FL before their games, like Galaxian, Battlebeam, Pengo, which is in the book, meaning fluorescent lamp. Other games used LCDs, liquid crystal displays, which you'll know from calculators and things like that. Obviously, Nintendo's Game and Watch series used LCD very prominently from 1980 onwards. Nintendo also made a sub-series of tabletop games, only 4 in total, including Donkey Kong Jr., which you can see here. I think Mario's Cement Factory is behind me as well. Nintendo's ones were coloured, but they still used the same kind of basic, the way that they lit up. I'm not going to get into the technicalities of it in this talk, but yeah, they used light from above, shining through, mirror, present the image to the player. So what the actual screen was in the machine is kind of backwards to what you're seeing on the Nintendo ones. Then you had manufacturers like Tiger, distributed by Grandstand, things like Afterburner. They did an Outrun game as well. They did loads. Obviously, you can see a lot of them over there. LCDs generally cheaper. They've lasted a lot longer in terms of being a viable kind of commercial product. So much so that Hasbro, which now owns these things, reissued a select number of handheld Tiger games. I want to say in 2020. I think there was X-Men and Transformers and some other things. They're terrible. They're terrible, terrible games. Not to upset anyone. But I don't think they're fun, but they're nice collectibles. They are nice things to look at. So I mentioned before about the kind of physical side of these games. Thrust of the book really is conveying what it felt like to play the games. Not just like here's some information off the internet or from the back of the box, but actually sit there and play it. How far does the joystick travel? How squeaky are the buttons? How shrill are the sounds? That kind of thing. So in a way, I look at them, and this was kind of underpinning the whole pitch of the book, really, was these are arcade imperfect games, but within themselves, they're all brilliant at what they do.
You must have had to have suffered the sounds of these things, Mike, in the making of this book. But they couldn't all be terrible. So what are some of the best sounding tabletop games in your opinion?
Tricky, because I think a lot of them, when you're in the moment of playing, you don't realize how annoying they can be. Like, I had a game running just the other day, post coming into the cave, got a few of them out. And my wife was like, "What? That's just horrible. Like, can you not mute that?" And no, like some of them you can, some of them you can turn the sound off. So the kind of broader answer is none of them really sound good. It's your proper basic beeps and bleeps, and every now and again a little kind of tinny ditty plays out. But in terms of a game that at least goes an extra mile with its audio, you've got Firefox F7, which has got what looks like stereo sound. It's not necessary. It's not running the same noises or same music through each speaker. It's different effects on either side. And in terms of its music, it plays a very, very recognizable ditty from Star Wars. I think it's the I'm going to try and remember now, Imperial something or other. It's written Imperial Attack theme it plays. It's like a lot of these games. It wears its Star Wars influences rather obviously on its sleeve. But Firefox F7 has a game that is actually created, bear in mind these are all their own things, built with that specific experience in mind. That's a game where its makers have gone, we want to make this stand apart from the rest with its stereo speakers and its different sound effects. So F7 for sure. Otherwise, you're looking at a lot of like games that have vaguely classical melodies as played through, three shrill notes. You know, it's the sound is not an area these things are remembered. I mean, they're remembered fondly from a nostalgic perspective, like, oh, I had that as a kid. It reminds me of being young and having far less responsibility. But none of them are pushing any boundaries, that's for sure.
And if there's one very familiar sound effect in video games history, it's this. Yes, with the advent of the smash hit that was Space Invaders, tabletop gaming wanted to follow that opportunity, and well, Mike will tell us what happened next.
So moving on to Space Invaders, and the first VFD clone. Well, obviously Space Invaders comes out in '78, and so do a lot of VFD games that play like Space Invaders. One of the first is Galaxy Invader from 1978. You can still find this game in lots of secondhand markets, lots of expos, you know, all over eBay. The joystick, I suppose, the mission station lever moves quite a long way before your ship moves, but again, that's what we're getting into in the book. The button's got these weird nodules all over it, which is a choice that somebody made. But yeah, like what I really like about it, you know, it is ripping off Space Invaders, but they're really built to last, a lot of these. Like I love how bulky and just the plastic feels so thick. You don't think you'd get that these days. Well, you definitely wouldn't with the cost of manufacturing, but I just love how it feels in the hand. You know, the whole point of this is like the kind of heft of these things. And from Galaxy Invader came several more, not least of all Galaxy Invader 1000, which we'll see a little clip of in a minute. Astro Wars, which I kind of go back to Astro Wars a lot because it felt like it was one of the most prominent games in the UK at the time. It really felt like you could walk into a Tandy and find it, Woolworths. It was an Argos every year till about 1997, it felt like. You know, just never ever kind of went off shelves. Invader from Space, beautiful. I love the way that one looks with the radar design. The kind of it's not easy to play because it's got the fire button in a really silly place, like above your left and right control. Again, like manufacturers, games makers, they hadn't really established a standardized language of how you control things. So these things were all different. And I don't know if anyone ever played Space Shot, a Tandy game you could get, which almost a bit like the Virtual Boy in the way it was presented with LEDs. And yes, apparently it gave it a 3D feel. It doesn't. Don't stick your face into it. But yeah, novel. You know, again, they're experimenting, they're innovating within their niche, and I really love that, you know. But Galaxy Invader 1000, you'll see how close it is to Galaxy Invader in this clip.
Hey kids, now you can take your favorite game with you anywhere. Galaxy Space Invaders. You hold the future in your hands, so get them before they land. Play it easy, play it hard. You choose with this skill switch. Pow, got him. Oh no, got him again. You can be a space hero. Just play Galaxy Space Invaders and pulverize them. Galaxy Space Invaders from Futuretronics. Space Age games for Space Age kids.
Available from Grace Brothers, Toy World, Kmart, Myer, David Jones and selected stores.
Post Space Invaders, I think the next one that really spawns a rash of imitators is PacMan. You know, PacMan's released in 1980. It's, you know, crazy time for that game. You know, PacMan fever, as they called it. You've got records out, you've got clones aplenty. Namco doesn't know what to do with all the money. It's a good time for everyone involved. And Munchman is one of the first games to kind of come out from that. And what I always thought was interesting about Munchman, despite its kind of 90-degree tilted layout and the fact that your Munchman can only eat pills when he's moving to the left. If you have to move him right to go back left, it's really annoying. It was officially licensed. In other territories, this did come out as Pac-Man. It came out as Puckman in Japan. Coleco also released their own Pac-Man game. We'll get onto Coleco a little bit later, more of an American presence. But yeah, you can see here, like, you know, it's Pac-Man, right? And again, I love the fact that it's Pac-Man, but not. It's got the centralized controller. You can see a Japanese advert real quick. I promise this isn't all videos. There are a few videos, but yeah, just wanted to show that, you know, this was a genuine Pac-Man product in Japan.
パックマンが勝つかモンスターが勝つかこれが噂のパックマン
PacMan. Yes, didn't translate so well over here, did it? So Puck Monster though. So when Numbskull came to me, sort of, would I be interested in this project? This is the first game I kind of went back and kind of did like a treatment for. Puck Monster was absolutely my favorite VFD game, favorite tabletop game. I mean, you know, handheld, interchangeable. I played it lying on my bedroom floor, right? You know, on the knackered carpet, annoying my parents because it was incredibly loud. But I didn't know it at the time, but this was an actually really faithful version of PacMan. Really, really, really cool. And there is a version of it in Japan that has a Namco license on it. So I don't know exactly where, amid the kind of agreements, that kind of fell apart. But there's two versions of it you can buy in Japan. One is slanted, and this model is flat. And on the slanted version, you can see in kanji script, Namco licensed. But we're rapidly moving on to a very, very famous name in gaming to this day, which is Nintendo. There's a very, very close-up of the game that's behind us over there. So Nintendo in the early 80s obviously isn't the Nintendo of today, just like how controls weren't standardized, nor was their branding. So when these games were coming out, you had Mario Cement Factory. This is probably more amusing to people like yourself, Ewan, because Mario definitely doesn't look like this anymore.
Mario isn't risking his neck against Donkey
With orange
Kong.
overalls.
He's up to his neck in cement in Mario Cement Factory.
Watch out, it's gonna spill.
A tabletop game from Nintendo, made so batteries can last 3 years. Batteries not included, with colorful characters and the story of the rise and fall of Mario. Nintendo tabletop games, 3 in all, each sold separately. Snoopy game, Popeye game, and Mario Cement Factory. From Nintendo.
Yes, Nintendo had launched its Game & Watch series in 1980 with Ball. Again, there's some great examples just over there to see later on. Pioneered the D-pad with Donkey Kong in 1982. And released 4 tabletop games, three of which also came out in the Panorama screen series. There was Popeye, there was Snoopy, Mario Cement Factory, and Donkey Kong Jr. 3 of those are featured in the book. Snoopy isn't, because buying those games are really expensive. So we didn't get that one for the book. It would have been nice to, but we didn't. Yeah, and so the Panorama series had 6 in total, kind of complemented by Mickey Mouse, Mario's Bombs Away, and Donkey Kong Circus. And you can see them all here, incredibly collectible. And just to kind of focus on Popeye for a second, and obviously Popeye in Nintendo's history is quite fun anyway. You know, Donkey Kong starts as a Popeye game and they can't get the license, and that side of history. But Nintendo had already made 2 Popeye games prior to this one coming out. But this is unique. It's not a platformer. It's not the juggling game from the Game & Watch. It's basically a beat 'em up, where the whole point of the game is to knock Brutus, depending on where you are in the world, off the end of the pier, save olive oil. You know, you can get your spinach at some point. I was listening to a quiz on the way here in the car. And when Popeye was on TV, it pushed sales of spinach up by 33%. I love that. Good. See, more cartoon heroes should eat stuff that's healthy for you, right? And then we'd all be in a better position. Anyway, so you move back and forth. It's quite clear the instruction there. Punch. 2 difficulty levels. What's good about a lot of these games is, being able to play in easy mode and not so easy mode. There are some VFD games that actually have adaptive difficulty. That's detailed in the book. There are some that, if you're not doing very well, it'll make it easier on you, which I quite like. That's something we think of more, in console game. Resident Evil 4 does that famously, but there were people making games way, way back when who were doing the same thing.
These Nintendo ones are particularly well made. I love how they've got the window at the top to let light in. And you do get something of an arcade experience with the way that it's laid out. Very well thought out, Nintendo. I do love these ones. And they're weighty too. These are chunky devices, and I can see why they're so collectible. Nintendo are obviously a huge name in this market, but there were plenty of others, as Mike goes on to tell us.
Some Konami games from the early 80s in the arcades made their way to VFD as well. Amadar and Jungler, being amongst them, with the pop-up lids here from Gakken. Yeah, Gakken made these. They also did a version of Dig Dug. That was their third one in this range. They're quite cool, actually. They kind of protect your screen when you're not using it. But Konami also licensed Frogger to Gakken and Coleco. So there's different versions of Frogger out there. There's a CJL import just behind me, which has got the big yellow shell. There was more of a traditional arcade cab proportioned ones that came out in America from Coleco. So Frogger was around in various forms in the early 80s as a VFD. Sega as well licensed Pengo to Bandai, one of their FL games featured in the book. Zaxxon, that's a very, very, very cool VFD game. Uses 2 VFDs in it to create the isometric effect. Really, really hard to play in my experience, but worth it if you can kind of rewire your brain to make sense of it working isometrically. There is a Bandai one as well. I think the handheld version of the Bandai one is just over there, but that plays more into the screen like the 2600 game. Sega obviously licensed Afterburner and Outrun as well. Some of you might remember, well, you've seen the larger Afterburner model. They did a Outrun one as well with a steering wheel. Not very good, but looked really cool, right? And that's kind of the main thing with those LCD games, I think. Yeah, and Coleco was doing a lot of stuff in America. Zaxxon was one of theirs. They also advertised a lot of their VFD adaptations with a character called Mr. Arcade. We're going to see Mr. Arcade in action in a minute. He's going to help people out who really need to leave the arcade.
Wow! Mr. Arcade! Get him out of here!
He's playing Donkey Kong!
You like Donkey Kong, eh? Okay, big fella! It's the official tabletop version of Donkey Kong, and it looks, plays, and sounds the same. It even has different screens as you get higher. And even more important, you can take Donkey Kong home.
Official Donkey Kong, the arcade game you can take home with you from Coleco.
While Mr. Arcade was saving relationships in that part of the world, it was companies such as Grandstand here in the UK who we were really familiar with when it came to tabletop gaming, and that was the name that we saw in the catalogues like the Argos catalogue, which we would furiously circle in the months leading up to Christmas each year in the hope that we might get one of these. Mike goes on now to tell us a little bit more about UK specific history when it comes to tabletop gaming.
So Grandstand, probably the biggest name in the UK, I think, in terms of these games. We have Scramble, Caveman, Astro Wars, Star Force, Firefox, F7, Tron, Invaders from Space, Munchman. Like I said before, many of them came from Japan, were given different names, different brandings. So Caveman and Tron were both Tomy games. Some of them, when you pick them up, will still have Tomy written on them, right? They'll have Grandstand, they'll also have Tomy. Others were made by Epoch, which is quite an interesting company in so much as they were also busy in the console space. They released 2 home consoles and also a handheld. They released the Game Pocket computer in 1984. So that's another one. I think the Microvision is behind me, but another pre-Game Boy handheld that used interchangeable games. So worth a look if you ever get the chance to see that. And Grandstand were also busy in other areas. While known for VFD and LCD games, they were active in the home console space. They licensed some Pong clones from VTech and sold them over here. I'm sure a lot of you would have seen these at car booties and the likes of it. The kind of plug-in Pong, you can play squash or football or badminton. They're all the same game, guys. They repurposed or rebranded the Fairchild Channel F. The F is for fun, of course, which is just over there, and sold it as the video entertainment computer. And I think most interestingly, in New Zealand, where they were also active, they're founded in the UK, but also based in New Zealand, they sold the Sega SG-1000 just as the Sega 1000 over there. So Sega's kind of came out at the same time as the Famicom in Japan, of course, didn't make anywhere near the same kind of dent, but they were selling it over there in limited quantities. But yeah, just to go through some VFD MVPs. So like I was talking about, these are kind of games that, as I was writing the book, I felt went that kind of extra yard, games that were like that little bit more special than the rest. Anyone play the Tron arcade game? Like, from 1982, really, really cool arcade. I mean, the cab itself is beautiful. but it had these different experiences in it. And Tron, the VFD game, is really interesting because it has 3 games in it. It's not just here's a PacMan maze. It's not just here's a Space Invaders style field. It has the light cycles. It has a disc arena, and then it has a kind of, you have to throw your disc between this barrier that's shielding the MCP, and then you hit that, it blows up, then the levels repeat, getting more difficult as you go. Like I said, they're the highest, you've got to achieve a high score. But just a really cool looking game, and it is, I'm going to get it. It's just here, and you can see what I mean here. It's got a see-through shell, and you can see this little fake design underneath. I just love all that. You don't need to do that. But they did, and I love it. And it's actually got, it's not a D-pad, but it's actually the kind of more traditional layout as well. But yeah, it also says, and it does say it, I'm not just making it up, 1981 Walt Disney Productions, which is a bit of time travel, because of course it didn't come out till 1982. So dig into that a little bit. Couldn't really find a reasonable answer, but I guess they were licensing stuff, before the movie came out. But I do assure you, Tron came out in 1982. Stargate's a really cool one. The sequel to Defender plays fantastic. Really tricky with the controls. Like you'll see that it's got the stick here that looks for all the world like it will be an up and down, left and right thing. It's not. It's just up and down, just like Defender, where you've got your thrust buttons. You've got an independent bomb button. You kind of need to tackle it like a keyboard, like a music, with your 4 fingers all in place. It's almost like Guitar Hero, when you've got to wire your brain a certain way to play it. And if you can, it's brilliant. Star Force, we were talking about Astro Wars. This is its quasi sequel. And what I love about Star Force is, again, that kind of what can we do within this space? What can we do with the hardware we've got? And it does this semi-convincing sensation of movement. I don't know if anyone's played this one. There's a star field behind you. It kind of moves, so it gives you the sense of going forward. Your ship, as you move it, it's not just flat. It banks as you turn. All these little details that just it's a bit like when developers start working at the start of a console life cycle, right? And they get 5 years in and they know what they're doing. It really feels like that. It's like, oh, we did Astro Wars, we did this, that, and the other, but now we've got it. Now we've got this technology and we know what to do. Enemies attack from all sides. It's a really, really cool game. It's got a really weird joystick that I really don't like. It's kind of like you're meant to put your thumb on it, I guess, but you just kind of end up holding it like this. Not necessarily easy, but very, very cool game. Like that one a lot. Again, released elsewhere as Super Galaxy 2 and Galaxy 2, referencing what Astro Wars was known as. And something a bit different, it was Alien Chase, Tomi's Alien Chase. There's a 2-player head-to-head, so 1 VFD in the middle, player controls on either side. Not based on a license, but if you start it up, like a few of these games, it basically sounds like Star Wars. Got to collect your little aliens, take them back to your ship. It's really cool, kind of local competitive game, which didn't really happen that often. And then Boxing, or Knock 'em Out Boxing by Bambino. Bambino didn't really have as much of a presence here. You certainly couldn't open up the Argos catalogue and find them in that alongside Grandstand, Tomy and the like. Quite a lot of them were sports sims. What I really like about Boxing is it's not just like the Popeye game we saw there, which is move and punch. This one has different stances. You can duck out of the way, you can stand back. You have to commit yourself forward to attack the other player, and when you do that you leave yourself vulnerable, but that's the only way you can hit them. So there's a level of strategy there that you maybe wouldn't automatically assume with this kind of medium of games, I suppose.
Bambino got a mention just there. Can you tell us a bit more about them? Were they a big deal in the tabletop games world?
So Bambino, so a lot of these electronic games kind of come from Japan originally and are imported by various companies, Grandstand kind of foremost amongst them. Bambino is based in LA, or was based in LA, so an American company. Produced a lot of sports-related games. They had basketball, ice hockey, soccer, boxing. Boxing's in the words boxing and basketball are in the book. But they also did Space Laser Fight as a 2-player head-to-head game. You've got that in the cave. So they produced, I want to say it was 11 games. I mean, this is in the book. We go through all of the manufacturers between about 78 and 81. So they kind of burned brightly more in the US market capacity rather than internationally, I think. I mean, they were not games that I remember seeing in Tandy or Woolies or, in the Argos catalogue, but they'd kind of gone, I suppose, by, like I say, by 82, they weren't around anymore. So they didn't really stick around. What I really liked about Bambino, though, and I do talk about this in the book, and I talked about it in the talk as well, is that they're kind of like overly grandiose statements about infinite play possibilities and stuff. And I just love that. Like, they were really the kind of tub thumping, like, we the wonderful computer brains that they're using in their games. It's just really fun to look back at, because they're doing some interesting things in the talk I did at the cave, or I talk about boxing and about how, like, rather than it just being a bit of a slugfest, there's tactics to it. There's some strategy. You have to like choose the right moment to go forward. Basketball's kind of the same. It's not just like shoot, dunk, block. There's more to it than that. So they were trying some things that maybe in the long run didn't translate as well to that kind of arcade immediacy. Something like a PacMan clone or a Space Invaders clone, Astro Wars or whatever. You get it, you turn it on, I shoot up the screen, I do the thing, right? Boxing and basketball from Bambino weren't quite so simple. So whether that was a factor in them disappearing, I'm not sure. But they didn't stick it out like the Tomies of this world.
Mike's done a really good job to condense the history of the thousands of examples of these games that must have come out around the world, if not tens of thousands, into this book. So he's done a really good job of that. And collectively, they did, of course, create a legacy in video game history, as Mike went on to tell us.
But in terms of legacy of these things, the kind of tabletop styled games that are prominent throughout the book, there was some consoles based like it. You had the Adventure Vision, which I mentioned before. There it is in person, and the Vectrix, which you can play here at the cave. Please do. It's great with its vector graphics. You do get a range of emulation-based products nowadays. You can even walk into a game and probably find them. They might be single games, they might be multi-game things. You've got these really cool products like the Astro City Mini, the Taito Egret 2 Mini, and Neo Geo's. I say the Neo Geo one's okay, the joystick's weird. Neo Geo Mini all come with preloaded games. I don't know if any of you are keen on what Evercade does, but they're releasing something called the Alpha this year as well, which is a bar top arcade basically, and you can plug your Evercade games in and play it like a little mini arcade. So even though the home console side of things doesn't exist anymore, and obviously VFD is kind of by the wayside a long time ago, the form factor lives on. I think the appeal of a small arcade machine is still very cool.
I hope you enjoyed Mike's talk today as much as I did. It was great to go over it again and have the chance to offer some follow-up questions for him to really dig into this. And thank you to everyone also who came along on the day to enjoy Mike's talk, to try out all the games, and to enjoy everything that we have to offer here at the Retro Collective. If you'd like to find out more, do check out Mike's book, From Coin-Ups to Tabletops. I'll put a link in the video description where you can find out more about that. And if you'd like to come and visit the Retro Collective, head to retrocollective.co.uk, where you can come and enjoy everything that we have to offer. If you really want to support us, head to patreon.com/RMC Retro, where you can sign up and pledge. And as always, I hope you enjoyed today's videos. Do share in the comments your memory of these types of games. What did you have? What did you cherish? What did you take to school on the last day of term and hopefully not lose or break? Many of these are indestructible, as Mike said. And I see you in the comments section, and I'll see you in our next video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.